Azure DevOps is a suite of development tools provided by Microsoft to support the entire software development lifecycle. It includes services like Azure Repos, Azure Pipelines, Azure Boards, Azure Test Plans, and Azure Artifacts. These tools help teams plan smarter, collaborate better, and ship faster. In this presentation, we will delve into the specifics of implementing and managing service connections and personal access tokens, PATs, within Azure DevOps, which are crucial for maintaining security and compliance. Service connections in Azure DevOps are used to connect to external and internal services. They allow Azure pipelines to communicate with various services like Azure, GitHub, Docker, and more. Service connections store the credentials and other necessary information securely, ensuring that your pipelines can access the resources they need without exposing sensitive information. Proper management of these connections is essential for maintaining the security and integrity of your DevOps processes. Azure DevOps supports various types of service connections, including Azure Resource Manager, GitHub, Docker Registry, and more. Each type of service connection has its own configuration requirements and use cases. For instance, an Azure Resource Manager service connection is used to deploy resources to Azure, while a GitHub service connection is used to integrate with GitHub repositories. Understanding the different types of service connections and their purposes is key to effectively managing them. Creating a service connection in Azure DevOps involves navigating to the project settings, selecting service connections, and then choosing the type of connection you want to create. You will need to provide the necessary credentials and configuration details, such as subscription ID, tenant ID, and client secret for an Azure Resource Manager connection. Once created, these connections can be used in your pipelines to securely access external services. Managing service connections involves regularly reviewing and updating the credentials and permissions associated with each connection. This ensures that only authorized users and pipelines have access to the connected services. Azure DevOps provides tools for managing service connections, including the ability to edit, delete, and restrict access to specific users or groups. Regular audits and updates are essential to maintain security and compliance. Personal access tokens (PATs) are used to authenticate to Azure DevOps services. They provide a secure way to access Azure DevOps resources without using your primary credentials. PATs are typically used for non-interactive scenarios, such as accessing the REST API or automating tasks. They can be scoped to specific permissions and have a limited lifespan, reducing the risk of unauthorized access. To create a PAT, navigate to your Azure DevOps profile, select Security, and then choose Personal Access Tokens. You can specify the scope of the token, such as read, write, or manage permissions for various Azure DevOps services. You can also set an expiration date for the token. Once created, the PAT can be used in scripts, tools, or applications to authenticate to Azure DevOps services securely. Managing PATs involves regularly reviewing and rotating tokens to minimize the risk of unauthorized access. Azure DevOps allows you to view all active tokens, revoke tokens that are no longer needed, and create new tokens as required. Implementing a policy for regular token rotation and monitoring token usage can help maintain the security of your Azure DevOps environment. To ensure the security of your service connections, follow best practices such as using least privilege principles, regularly updating credentials, and restricting access to only those who need it. Additionally, use managed identities where possible to avoid hard-coding credentials. Regularly audit your service connections to ensure compliance with your organization's security policies. For PATs, follow best practices such as using the minimum scope necessary, setting short expiration periods, and regularly rotating tokens. Store PATs securely, such as in Azure Key Vault, and avoid sharing them in plain text. Monitor the usage of PATs and revoke any tokens that are no longer needed or appear to be compromised. Compliance is a critical aspect of managing service connections and PATs. Ensure that your practices align with regulatory requirements such as GDPR, HIPAA, and others relevant to your industry. Implement policies for regular audits, access reviews, and incident response to maintain compliance. Document your processes and maintain records of access and changes to support compliance efforts. Consider a case study where a company successfully implemented secure DevOps practices by managing service connections and PETs effectively. They used Azure DevOps to streamline their development processes while ensuring security and compliance. By following best practices, regularly auditing their connections and tokens, and implementing strict access controls, they were able to maintain a secure and compliant DevOps environment. In conclusion, implementing and managing service connections and paths in Azure DevOps is crucial for maintaining security and compliance. By understanding the different types of connections, following best practices, and regularly reviewing and updating your configurations, you can ensure that your DevOps processes are secure and efficient. The next steps involve applying these practices in your own environment and continuously monitoring and improving your security posture.